Digital payment processing was a godsend to the industry of, all of e-commerce became possible only after the internet became widespread and the digital payment systems were developed. They would have been wonderful it would have been so much more profitable had Atari been able to allow people to use credit cards for micropayments of 25 cents each, or maybe accumulate a credit of let's say $1 even on what we call a coin-op machine. That was such an old-fashioned way of dealing, and there's so much more improvement now with digital payment system, particularly with games. Games only started having internal capabilities of collecting fees and revenues. Just in the last, I'd say 10 years at the max, and I don't even think it's been that long. I constantly am amazed at how short a time it's been since the internet became a huge factor in the industry. But without electronic payments, it would be much more difficult for the industry to be thriving as it is now. I think that's something that one of the things that Electronic Arts hasn't been able to really exploit yet is the internet. Possibly because, or probably because we had a very strong relationship with retailers, and retail distribution was important to us, but we also had products that were so massive and so large that the internet bandwidth just wasn't there for many, many years. I remember there were many years when I was still using a 14.4K baud or something modem in order to obtain internet services, and that was way too slow to download an Electronic Arts game. So we still had to package them and sell them at retail. As the internet became more sophisticated and went through its whole crisis of 2000, it became much more practical, and now has kind of saved the industry that you can have micropayments in the middle of a game, and that you can play games on a smartphone. Think how long ago the smartphone was introduced. What was it, 2007? I think it was the first smartphone or the first iPhone anyway. So it hasn't been that long, and yet it's made a huge difference in the way the industry can develop. In fact, people ask me sometimes, isn't it kind of too late to start a gaming company? And my response is, no. There's never been a better time. The market is so huge now. Billions of people can play games on smartphones. We never had that opportunity or luxury, and they can be reached so cheaply. It's an amazing time to start a company. The best time of my lifetime, that's for sure. Hardware business was at Atari was incredibly complicated. First of all, it was mostly in the late 70s and early to mid 80s, and so there was not nearly the computerization of assembly lines or anything like that we have now. There wasn't the nanotechnology that we have now, and one of the things that made the home business for Atari so attractive was that all you had to do was connect your piece of hardware to a television, and that seems like a kind of a no-brainer. You didn't have to sell a video display screen along with the actual unit that played the game. Well, the problem with that was that most people probably don't understand that there are different television standards all around the world. The United States and most of South America, but most of the Americas, use what's called an NTSC standard display this is on televisions back in the old days when they were CRTs. But then there was a standard for the UK called PAL-A, I believe, and then there was a standard for most of Europe called PAL-B. And those were different ways that the screens on televisions, the CRT units, were created. And of course, France had its own separate standard called CCAM. So each unit that you shipped around the world had to have a different standard for output for the television systems that were prevalent in the region of the world that the machine was going to. And that was very complicated to keep straight and complex to track, and it made it much more difficult to manufacture. Software, on the other hand, it did have to be compatible with different standards of operating systems back then, but most of those were pretty much the same. They had different processors, some of them did, but there weren't nearly the differences that software had to accommodate like there were with hardware problems. So software is much more flexible, much easier to change quickly, to create multiple versions of, and to keep those versions straight. You still have the differences of iOS versus the Android operating systems, and those create some hiccups in the software business, but it's nothing like what the hardware wars created when you were having to manufacture, at Atari anyway, all these different standards for different televisions around the world. Software is just inherently more flexible, as we all know now, and so now virtually anything is possible. I think our philosophy toward the people that we hired was that we wanted A players, definitely. We only wanted the best we could find of employees. And we also were creating a company culture. Company cultures are always very important, and it starts at the top and filters down through the ranks. Well, in order for us to, I think, kind of reinforce a company culture, what we did, and this I believe was Tripp's idea, is that we had every employee interview every applicant for every position until we reached the point where I think it was probably about by the time we had 100 people, it just became too difficult to have every employee interview every applicant for every position. And I mean top executive positions down to the warehouse assistants. They had to interview with everybody in the company. So as we got larger, approaching 100 employees, it would take weeks for somebody to get through an application process, the interview process. I remember we were 2 years old, I believe, when we hired our vice president of sales, a second vice president of sales. The first one didn't work well. And we recruited a guy from Activision to become our VP of sales. Turns out he has been with the company ever since, so that's been 33 years he's been with the company. He's now chairman of the board. He was CEO for a number of years. His name is Larry Probst. He's fantastic. He really made Electronic Arts successful in so many ways, because he was at the helm as VP of sales and then CEO for many, many years. But when we were interviewing him, everybody in the company interviewed Larry. Even though he was going to be the VP of sales, our clerks interviewed him. And so what that did, as I say, it got as we got larger, closer, approaching 100 employees, we just couldn't afford to have everybody spend even 15 minutes with every applicant. But what it did was made the applicants themselves feel like after they'd interviewed with 80 people or 60 people or whatever it was at the time, and it took 2 weeks to get through all those interviews, when they were offered the job, it made them feel like they must be the most talented, most brilliant person in the world to get through all these interviews, even if they were just going to work in the warehouse. It made them feel good that they had lasted through the interviews. What it did for the employees who were doing the interviews, and they didn't spend a lot of time with it, but you were required to spend about 15 minutes with each applicant, and you were supposed to rank them on some various qualities, and you knew you didn't have a veto power, but you always were expected to hand in your rankings to the executive committee of the company. And so what that did was it made everybody that was an employee and doing the interviewing of all these people, they felt like they were contributing to the success of the company and to the environment of the company by having a say, some input on who was getting hired. And so it ended up being a very positive way to build what I consider to be a very strong company culture. And you know, when I'm back there these days, I go visit every once in a while, and I can still feel a lot of the aspects of that company culture that we tried to instill in everyone in the first few years of the company. As a matter of fact, every number of years, I think it's been 7 years, but this next month, we're having a reunion of early employees from Electronic Arts. They're coming from all over the world because it was such a special setting and such a special group that it's worth it after 35 years to come back and see these people that have spread all over the world. We're making it coincide a little bit with the Game Developers Conference here in San Francisco, because there we're more likely to get people from other continents that have drifted. They'll come to the Game Developers Conference. So we're having a reunion at Electronic Arts headquarters for the first few years of employees, and of course any after that want to come. It's just that after a few hundred people, you can't really know everybody in the company. Whereas for the first few years, until we got to about 300, you knew everyone in the company. If you didn't remember their names exactly, you certainly knew their faces. So it was, you know, it was a great feeling. As one of the things that I always thought was brilliant of Tripp was that he resisted hiring a person in charge of HR, exclusively HR, until about the time we went public, which was 7 years into it. For a young founder of a company, when they get to the point of having rapid growth, and it happens periodically, sometimes with companies, with product releases, and other times it's an extended period as the company's products, maybe they don't release new ones all the time like gaming companies tend to, but they have a product that just starts to gain traction. It's the most important thing that founders of such companies can do is dedicate in their entire work and wait time to the company. That's a crucial period in every company's life, and the idea of having a balance with their home life has to be overshadowed by the fact that the most important thing in a company's life is its rapid growth periods. And so that's really the time that everybody should be making the effort to maximize and exploit the high growth periods. And you can only do that by having everybody spend all their time on it. So one of the ways that I tried to handle that in companies, subsequent companies that I started with young developers and others, was that I would make sure that they understood that that as a stockholder, as an equity participant in the company, because that was always the case, they would have at a minimum 1 month of vacation time every year, which was more than standard. And I didn't even track it. What I tracked was if they were concentrating on the periods of time when we were facing really high growth potential, and if they were there and present, and then when we didn't have such pressure, I'd let them spend as much time as they wanted to with their family or on an extended vacation. One such important developer for me ended up really spending 3 years developing almost constantly, and after that time period he took 3 months and took an extended holiday with his wife, and that was fine. So it really is a matter of putting the effort into it when it's most important in the company's history, and that's at high growth periods. For games these days, if you're talking about console games, one of the most crucial aspects of it's becoming a successful game has to do with the marketing and the expertise of the marketing minds that accompany the development of the product. You have to have the top people thinking through the strategies of the segments that you're trying to reach, and the content and the way of presenting the content that will be most compelling and attractive to those segments. There's a difference, though, between console games and handheld games. Mobile games are very hard to predict. You know, in fact, the whole gaming industry is hard to predict. At Electronic Arts, we used to use testers, not testers, but focus groups. We used to have focus groups that we would bring in, pay to give us their feedback on video games that we had under development. And after spending lots of money and lots of time with focus groups, we realized that they didn't know what they were talking about. I mean, they never predicted a successful product for us. And so we decided, okay, focus groups is not the right way to go. A lot of people don't know what they want out of a game, and they don't know how to express it. So at least they didn't back then. So with the handheld video games that I've seen come to market, I don't think anybody could have predicted well that what the secret was of the product that makes people play it so much. I don't believe that you would ever get anybody from Rovio to tell you that, oh yes, it was their marketing group that figured out how to make Angry Birds a product that everybody loved to play. What they will tell you is that their marketing group is the one that was able to exploit the popularity of Angry Birds to create all sorts of other materials that would really make them a lot more money from the accessories that went along with the game. But the popularity of the game itself, I think, was very hard to predict. I've often heard them say that it was sort of the last game in a whole range of releases that failed. This was the last one that they were going to even try to do, and this one happened to be, Angry Birds happened to be a tremendous success. I don't know how you predict that kind of thing, and I don't think marketing is what creates the stickiness and the appeal for a lot of the handheld mobile games. But certainly, if you're talking about a box game, I mean, ones that plays on a base unit, that's very complicated and more like a movie to produce nowadays than they used to be. You need absolutely top marketing minds thinking through what it's going to take to promote the game. So it's crucial in the one area, and probably it's a toss-up in the other area. I don't know, because I look at games that are on handhelds smartphones, and some of them that are very popular, I think, I would never have guessed that this would be a popular game. I would never have backed this game. As an investor, I wouldn't have done it. But it's because it's so very hard to predict. It's a hits business. And I don't, unlike music, which is a hits business, musicians can kind of repeat a theme and have a certain feel to the music that they create that they know is popular, and they can produce title after title that will capture people's affection. Whereas, as you can see, Rovio has not come out with anything like Angry Birds as a sequel, and I don't know that they know how to do that. We certainly couldn't predict things in the gaming world at Electronic Arts very well. Certainly genres, yes, you can use. We got into the sports area and created EA Sports, which is a whole series of sports simulations. So in that regard, yes, we were able to replicate successes. But in terms of mobile gaming, it's a very hard thing to reproduce over and over again with new ideas and that captures the market. So marketing has its limitations in the mobile gaming industry.